The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you of what to do with your pool in the wintertime if you have a saltwater generator. One thing you need to know is that in most cases, the saltwater generator will probably stop producing chlorine in the winter months, and therefore you have to find an alternative to sanitize your pool. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. I like saltwater generators, salt systems, saltwater pools, however you want to phrase it. I think they're the most convenient way to sanitize your pool, which means this is the best way to add chlorine to the pool. And I think one common myth is that a saltwater generator is not a chlorine, doesn't make chlorine, or you don't use chlorine in a saltwater pool. That's still out there, but I think more information has gotten out to most people that they realize that the saltwater generator is like a small little chlorine factory that actually manufactures the chlorine for the pool. Let me step back before I talk about some of the winter care and talk to you a little bit about the rating of the saltwater generator or the salt cell. Most of these are rated for 10,000 hours of use. Some are rated for 15,000. Some are even rated for 20,000 hours of use. What this means is that the salt cell will last usually for that 10,000 hours based on how long it's running when the pool is running. So if you have let's just say you have a Jandy Trichlor system, and you have it set at 100% output, and you run it for 10 hours a day. Now that 100% output means that the salt cell is always going to be operating, producing chlorine while that pool is running 10 hours per day. Now this is just a baseline of how long the cell should last. But if you had a pool that was open for 8 months out of the year, so I'll just do some simple math. If you had your pool running 10 hours a day, 8 months out of the year is 240 days. That's 2,400 hours. That means that that salt cell should last about 5 years, give or take 4 or 5 years, because for about 4 months in the winter, at least in my area, now Florida may differ, other areas that stay warmer like Hawaii may also differ, but here, anywhere from late October till early March, mid-March, beginning of April, the saltwater systems aren't really working, generating chlorine because the water temperature is still too cold. Now we have a variety of weather here in Southern California. Sometimes we have a really warm winter. Like for instance, right now, my pool water temperature is still in the high 60s. So the saltwater generator will still work in that condition. Most saltwater generators stop working when it gets to about 60 degrees or below. Sometimes in the low 60s, like 63, 64. It'll also stop producing chlorine. Mainly because, again, I mentioned at the beginning that the saltwater generator is a mini chlorine factory, and so you need electricity to make it work. And in cold water, there's not a lot of conductivity, and so the salt cell just stops working because it can't convert the salt into chlorine in cold water. Now, one of the things that you should note is that 10,000 hours of life is based on usage. So in the wintertime, if you're not using the salt cell, you're going to extend the life of that saltwater cell. And this will get you maybe an extra year or two out of that salt cell by you not using it in the winter months because it's not going to be operating anyway. So that's a little bit of an added bonus to the saltwater generator and the lifespan. Now, of course, you can carry this further. If you were to run that salt system at 50% output, and then you would use the same equation, you would get 8 or 9 years, 10 years maybe out of that salt cell. And I've seen some pools out there get 7 or 8 or 9 years out of their salt system, their salt cell, I should say, before they have to replace it. Sometimes it's shorter. Sometimes the salt cell will last less than 10,000 hours. And sometimes, again, if you're putting less output, it's going to last longer. So the winter months actually are beneficial to the saltwater generator because now you're not running it in the wintertime. However, you have to supplement your pool with some kind of sanitizer in the wintertime because that saltwater generator is not working. And I'll touch on some of that in a minute. One other thing that I often get asked is, should I remove my salt cell We don't close our pools here in California, nor you don't close them in some parts of Texas, Arizona, Nevada, and Florida. So if it gets cold enough to where the saltwater generator is not working, should you just take that salt cell out and put a dummy cell in there? Now I know Hayward and Pentair make dummy cells for the Aquarite and for the IntelliChlor systems. So you can purchase one of those. You can make one out of PVC pipe pretty easily. You just need to get some fittings that are threaded, and then you would just cut the pipe to the right length and you would put it where the salt cell used to be. It'll probably cost you $10 to make one yourself, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. And then you can put that in where the cell would go. And of course you want to turn off your saltwater generator if you were to put a dummy cell in. A lot of times you can use an old salt cell. If your system is older and you've replaced your cell recently, you can take the new cell out and put the old cell in there and run that in the wintertime. It's not going to really be operating, and there's not going to be a lot of damage to the system anyway if you do leave your salt cell in there. The main thing is you're going to have calcium buildup on the plates, because no matter what time of season, if the system is being used or not, the calcium buildup is going to be something that happens on the cell plates of the salt cell. But you definitely want to turn the system off if you can in the wintertime. That way you're just not using the system. And it'll prevent any kind of errors also, because a lot of times when you get really low water temperature, the salt system, some of them will indicate it by having a low temperature light flashing, like the iChlor. Others will indicate low temperature by having the check cell light flashing, or may even be flashing low salt in that case. So it just depends on the system. Most will have a cold light that will come on, indicating that the water temperature is too cold for the system to produce chlorine. And the minimum water temperatures differ slightly from system to system, but I would say anything below 60 degrees would mean that the saltwater generator will usually stop producing chlorine in your pool at that point. So if you are getting something like low salt or clean cell or other flashing lights, check the water temperature. If it's below 60, chances are it's just how the system is reacting to the cold water at that point. And then I would just simply turn it off for the winter. You can either unplug the system, you can unplug the salt cell from the system itself, you can turn it off if there's an off button, like the Trichlor system has an off button. You just hold it down and then it'll turn the system off, and then leave it off until the water temperature starts to get warmer, and then you can turn the salt system on. Now a lot of times people will ask me, well, how do I know that the salt cell is not going bad in the winter time? Should I be concerned about that? I would say no. Most of the time, at the beginning of the season is when you check the salt cell to see if they're functioning or not. For example, if you had a Hayward Aquarite system and you're kind of limping through the season, the cell is telling you that it's low salt when you have plenty of salt in the water, and you clean it maybe every 3 weeks or so, and you finally get through the season, I wouldn't replace the cell at that point. I would wait till next season, see how it's operating at the beginning of the season, and then you can make your determination if you want to replace that salt cell. Usually in the wintertime, I'm doing nothing to the salt systems except maybe cleaning the salt plates that have calcium buildup. It's going to be less calcium buildup also usually in the cold water anyway, so I'm not doing much to the salt systems at all in the wintertime. And if you have a dummy cell, you're doing even less to your salt system. But by all means, you're not going to be replacing your salt water system or salt cell in the wintertime. The same goes for a new build. A lot of times, builders get really busy in the summer, and your build is not finished until November, December. If you have a saltwater generator, I would just simply leave that off until April or May, and then I wouldn't even add the salt to the pool until that time, mainly because it's kind of unnecessary. You're not going to be generating any chlorine with the saltwater generator, so why add the salt to the pool at that point? I would just wait, because it's one of those things where if you're not using it, there's no need to add the salt to the pool. Just leave the system off, and that's any pool that's built and finished in December, January, February, or March in California. I just wouldn't be too concerned about getting that online, nor charging the water with salt until you're going to use the system after the winter months are done. And this may be a slight problem. I've had a customer or two before have a pool built. They want the saltwater generator working. They don't like the fact that they have to use quote-unquote chlorine in the water in the winter. And I try to explain to them that unless they want to heat their pool to 80 degrees in the winter, the saltwater system is not going to work anyway. And it's better for the plaster or pool surface to wait anyway to add the salt to the pool. So I just kind of tell them to kind of cool their jets until it warms up. And besides, you're not going to really be using your pool much in the winter. You may use your spa. But I really explain to them that the saltwater generator basically makes liquid chlorine. So it's no different than using liquid chlorine in your pool at this point. And it's something that you have to educate the customers with. The saltwater system is not any better. I mean, it's better for the fact that maybe some people say that the water is a little softer, and it may be better because it gives a consistent chlorine dosage every day when you have it set correctly. But it's not really much different than liquid chlorine or chlorine gas that they used to use in the old days in the pools. And so educate the customer that it's perfectly fine to wait till the winter months are over. I mentioned a little bit earlier that some salt systems will indicate low salt when the water temperature is dropping. I wouldn't recommend adding salt to a saltwater pool, at least in my area where the water temperatures are in the 50s in the winter, because what's going to happen, since you're not using the saltwater generator, if you're adding salt to the pool in the wintertime, there's no way to know if you've really added too much salt, unless you have a digital meter, of course. And I would say that it's going to rain usually in the winter, and you're going to have to add salt at the beginning of the season. So to me, it's counterproductive to add any bags of salt in December, January, February. I usually wait until I fire the system up. I get a good salt reading from the system itself if it has a salinity meter in it, or I'll use my digital salinity meter to get the salt reading, and then I'll know how much salt to add when the season starts again to bring that pool up so that you don't have to worry about it having a low salt indicator or not producing chlorine. But adding salt to the pool in the winter is something that you shouldn't do. It's unnecessary unless you're, again, in a tropical area like Hawaii, parts of Florida, where the water temperature stays in the 70s all winter. Then it's perfectly fine to treat that salt system as a year-round sanitizer. But in other parts of the country where the water temperature does get into the low 60s or in the 50s, even into the high 40s, it's one of those things where the saltwater generator is not going to activate and work, so you're not going to be messing with anything regarding the salt level. Now, what should you do as far as sanitizing the pool, or what kind of chlorine should you use? Well, typically the pool water is going to be pretty cold in the winter, which means that the chlorine demand is going to be really low. For instance, in the summer, if you had a pool that you're using Trichlor tablets in, and it took 3 Trichlor tablets to keep that pool sanitized every week, in the winter time, you would probably just use half a tablet if you're going to continue using tablets, or you would use half a gallon of liquid chlorine every 2 weeks, maybe 1 gallon per month. And if you're using 1 gallon of liquid chlorine per week, you're probably going to use half a gallon in the winter per month in that pool. Now, since you're using a saltwater generator, you're not using liquid or tablets, you're probably scratching your head thinking, well, how much chlorine do I need to add to my pool in the wintertime then if I have no baseline, because the saltwater generator was making the chlorine for me, and if I don't have a baseline, for instance, Trichlor tablets, Cal Hypo, or liquid chlorine in the summer, how do I know how much chlorine to add in the winter? This is really easy to calculate, and it's something that I think you'll get used to as you're maintaining your pool. If you do pool service and you have, let's say, 10 saltwater pools on your route, you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly of how much chlorine to add. I always like to err on the side of adding too much and too little in everything, and so this is the same here. If you're going from a saltwater generator and the saltwater generator is turning off because the water temperature is, let's say it's 58 degrees, how much chlorine do you need? You don't need much at all, but I would always start with more than less. So let's say you have a 15,000 gallon pool, the water temperature is 58 degrees. I would easily put half a gallon of liquid chlorine in there, and then I would check it the following week to see if the chlorine level dropped at all from, it would probably be around 5.0 at that point. If it dropped down to 3, then you have to add a little bit more. The same goes with tablets. You can probably get away with 1 tablet each month in a 15,000 gallon pool, maybe 2 if you need to. And I would say that using Trichlor tablets in a saltwater pool in the wintertime is ideal. I like doing that on my route. So I have floaters that I carry that I'll tie to the skimmer. And this is really important that if you are using a floater in a pool that has a saltwater generator, tie it with a shoelace or a string to the skimmer lid, because you don't want that floating around in the pool. A lot of times it may land on the first step of the pool and then it could cause damage. So if the pool is unfamiliar to you with a floater, because you have a saltwater system. You could put a floater in there and use trichlor, but just tie it to the skimmer lid so it's not floating around in the pool. And of course, let the customer know that you're putting the floater in the pool with trichlor tablets as a secondary sanitizer for them, because a saltwater generator does not work in the winter. I know I did a podcast where I tried to analyze how you can get the chlorine level of a trichlor tablet in a pool. And there are a lot of factors: runtime, where you have the tablet. Is it in an inline chlorinator? Is it in a floater? What's the water temperature? And the water temperature is going to be a definite factor here. If the water temperature is, let's say, 60 degrees, and you put one trichlor tablet in a floater, it may take 3 weeks for that to fully dissolve, 2 or 3 weeks to fully dissolve. Where in the summer, that would be dissolved in like 5 days. So that is the main difference. The water temperature is colder. The trichlor tablet will dissolve at a slower rate. A lot of times when they put a saltwater generator in, they still put an inline chlorinator, like a Rainbow 320. I think that's smart, because then in the winter you can just use that chlorinator that's already on the equipment pad with a trichlor tablet to sanitize the pool. And one thing I like about trichlor tablets in the winter in saltwater pools is that they're adding a little bit of cyanuric acid to the water. In most cases, the saltwater pool has no other way of getting cyanuric acid introduced except you adding it separately. And so if you're going for a cyanuric acid of, let's say, 60 parts per million, and you're not adding any cyanuric acid to the pool in the wintertime at that point, with the rain, with some evaporation and refilling, you may have a cyanuric acid around 30 at the beginning of the season. And so why I like using trichlor tablets in saltwater pools in the off season, number one, is kind of one of those things that's easy, because then I won't be adding any liquid chlorine or cal hypo to the pool. I'll just be putting a tablet in the floater once every 3 weeks or so, and the cyanuric acid in there also will keep that cyanuric acid level pretty stable. And if you're worried about raising the cyanuric acid too high in a saltwater pool by putting 1 or 2 tablets in a month, I can tell you right now that's not going to move the needle tremendously. If you go through 4 months and you use 6 or 8 tablets, you're adding a very minimal amount of cyanuric acid to that pool, but you're adding some cyanuric acid so that when you go to test it at the beginning of the season, it's not going to be super low, and you may not have to add too much cyanuric acid, but it's a convenient way to keep those saltwater pools with some cyanuric acid, or to add cyanuric acid in the winter so that you're not adding too much in the summer. And if the pool doesn't have a floater that you're going to put there or an inline chlorinator, you can certainly forego the tablet and just use liquid chlorine. I wouldn't recommend using cal hypo per se, because cal hypo could cloud the pool up if you're not used to using it there. You can have a customer complain, "Hey, my pool looks really cloudy. What did happen to the pool?" You added a bag of cal hypo to the pool and made it cloudy. You're not used to it. Liquid chlorine has the least effect on the pool water, and the byproduct of liquid chlorine, of course, is salt. So you're adding a little bit of salt to the pool in the winter, which may not be a bad thing, especially if you get a lot of rain in your area. And it's very similar to what's being produced by the saltwater generator. So I would say that if you're going to add a sanitizer in the winter, liquid chlorine would probably be the best choice. A chlorine type that's really not on the radar of most people is called Dichlor. Dichlor would be a pretty good chemical to add to your pool in the winter also, because Dichlor is a chlorine type, much like Trichlor, that has cyanuric acid in it. So it has some stabilizer. When you're adding Dichlor, you're adding stabilizer to the pool in the winter. So I wouldn't object to using Dichlor. If you want to buy a 5-pound container of Dichlor and use that in the winter, you're adding about 2.5 pounds of cyanuric acid in the winter to your pool. With the Dichlor, it's about 50% or 60% cyanuric acid. So it's one of those things that's going to also help you to maintain the cyanuric acid level, plus adding chlorine to the pool. Again, liquid chlorine or Dichlor would be my choice. I would stay away from cal hypo, mainly because you're adding calcium to the water, but it may cloud the pool up too, which would be unsightly for a lot of customers who aren't used to having a pool cloud up slightly from cal hypo. You really don't need a lot of sanitizer in the winter, so the fact that the saltwater generator stops in the winter is not something that I would say would be anything like a deal breaker. I mean, if you're looking at getting a saltwater generator next year for your pool, and you've heard this, hey, it's not working in the winter, it's not really a big deal. It's actually beneficial for the saltwater generator because it extends the life of the salt cell itself. And if you're not using the pool in the winter, why would you want to have your saltwater generator working and wearing out that cell? It can be quite expensive to replace, and so the longer and get them to last, the better. To me, it's not a big deal having to add a sanitizer to the pool in the winter. There are plenty available, and it's something that you're going to need a small amount of anyway. It just takes one extra step of you having to check the chlorine level every week after adding it, and kind of adjusting down if you're using liquid chlorine, Dichlor, or Trichlor tablets to get it to where the chlorine level is 3 to 5 parts per million. You can even go lower to 2 or 1, because usually algae doesn't form in the winter. No one's really using the pool in the winter, so if it drops to 2 parts per million, it's really not a big deal. But I kind of generally like to keep all the pools at 3 parts per million to 5 parts per million, because sometimes you're going to use your spa, and you want to make sure that that's safe to use in the winter. When you put it in spa mode, everything gets converted over to the spa, and you want to have some chlorine level in there in the wintertime. So I like to keep the chlorine level at a decent level, maybe not necessary for most people, but something that I shoot for. You don't want to have no chlorine in the pool in the winter because, it could get cloudy. And I've seen algae form in cold water, but not really aggressively. It's really something that doesn't really happen much. And if you have an attached spa, you want to make sure you have some sanitizer in the pool when you put it in spa mode and use your spa in the winter. If you're looking for other podcasts that I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon, and then close to 1,300 podcasts will pop down for you, and you can listen to those at your leisure. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.